Hello again. We are going to keep talking about prepositions. And today I thought we would talk about some of the problems that you can have when you're trying to figure out which one to use because it's complicated. They are the hardest thing to use in English, or at least I have seen they're the hardest thing for people to learn how to use right. So if you don't use them right, it's it's okay. It takes a long time. Okay. So we talked about last time, why is it on the bus but in the car if we use on for smaller things than, than the word in, right? Because we said use at for small specific things, use on for kind of medium-sized things, and then use in for really big or broad things, right? So why is it on the bus but in the car? A bus is bigger than a car. Or why is it in Utah but on Earth? Earth is bigger than Utah, right? So for on the bus versus in the car, think of how, this is the best way I can explain it, is think of how you can stand on the bus, but you sit in the car. Um, that's why, and part of the reason we use the word in the car has to do with like when you get into a car, not only do you go into the car, but you also have to kind of step down into it, right? You step into a car. But then with a bus, you step onto, right? You go up, you're standing on the bus. You can sit on the bus, right? But the point is that you can stand on it, I guess. So that's one of the ways to kind of know why you say on the bus but in the car. The other one is, why is it in Utah but on Earth? Why do we say in Utah and then we say on Earth? Doesn't make any sense. So the reason we say in Utah is because Utah has a border, right? It's something that you go into because there's little imaginary lines that are saying that the government says this is Utah, right? So you can go into that area. Earth is not something, when you go in the earth, that means like inside, right? Um, we say on because it supports us, right? We stand on it. So that's one of the reasons that we say in Utah or in the United States or in Europe, in South America, but we say on Earth, right? Because it's something that supports us. On the bus, it's something that supports us. So that was a little explanation of some of the weird things I talked about last lesson. The next thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, why are prepositions so hard? So there are three big reasons why they're so hard. Is one, you've probably noticed that prepositions can have up to 30 meanings. So instead of having a word like work, which I can tell you what the meaning of it is, something like the word for or to can be used with lots of different meanings. So that's why it's so hard, is because they can be used to mean so many different things, right? For example, when you say the word to, you can use it for direction. I am going to the bus, right? But you can also use it to talk about, see, I just used it too. You can also use it when you talk about giving something, right? I gave my dessert to my sister, right? So that's using the word to in a different way, right? Or let's see, the word by, I think, is another preposition that you can use, and it has lots of different meanings. So they can have lots of different meanings. So that's number one reason why it's hard. Number two, it's also hard to use prepositions because a lot of times they don't translate into your first language, or your first language has a different order, right? Um, there are some words that you may have that you don't need to have a preposition with it. but in English you do. So that's another reason, is you kind of have knowledge of how language works from your first language, and English is obviously a different language, and so it's hard to translate it into your own language. The other thing that's hard about prepositions, so number 3 reason why it's hard, is because prepositions are used in idioms. Now, you're probably like, what is she talking about? What is an idiom? It sounds like the word idiot. What does that mean? What are idioms? So in English, we use these things called idioms. You have definitely heard them before. So an idiom is a group of words, so like a sentence or a phrase, and the meaning of the entire group of words does not come from the meaning of each individual word. So what do I mean by that? So what do I mean when I say that? So for example, if I say she works at home, when I say she works at home, you can understand what I am saying by looking at each word that I'm saying. Okay, so the word she, let me get my little pen out. So she, when I say she, I am talking about somebody that's a woman, right? That's the pronoun we use to signify somebody that is not us, that's a woman. She works. Works is a verb, right? It means to go to work, what your job is. She works at, that's talking about, the place. It's talking about, the place that she is at. She works at home. She works at her house. So we can understand what this whole sentence means by looking at every single little word in the sentence to give it a meaning. So this whole sentence means something because of what each of these words mean. We get the meaning from all the tiny little words. So for an idiom is something that if you looked at every single word, what it means when we say it in English is not what all of the little words are telling us. So for example, this is an idiom that we use. So person 1, somebody's talking to you and they say, "Do you like beer?" And the second person says, "Kind of." Kind of. Well, we know that like kind can mean nice, right? Or kind can also mean the type that something is. Like, what kind of car do you drive? And you'd say, "Oh, I drive a blue truck," or "I drive a silver sedan." Um, that's when we can use kind of, right? But somebody's asking, "Do you like beer?" And somebody says, "Kind of." Kind of what? What does that mean? We can't figure out the meaning just based off of these words. But in English, when somebody says kind of, it means sort of, almost. You almost like it. You don't love it, but you don't hate it. That's what kind of is. And that's how we use it in English. But if you were to just hear that, right? I'm sure this has happened to you all the time where somebody says something in English and you're like, I understand all of those words by themselves, but I don't know what it means together. So that's how it is. So I listed some more idioms. So when somebody says, "of course," of course what? What's the course? Why do we have the word of there? Of is a preposition, right? Of course, what does that mean? Of course is like saying yes. It's a very polite way of saying definitely yes, a formal way of saying it. So if somebody says, "Hey, can you stay for 2 more hours?" You say, "Oh, of course." That's like you saying, "Definitely yes, of course." With a grain of salt. What? With a grain of salt? So you could be talking to somebody and you could tell them, "Hey, um, let's see. Maria told me that I smelled bad. Do I smell bad?" And the person goes, "Ugh, you have to take everything Maria says with a grain of salt." And what that means is, so when you hear that, you're like, why are they talking about salt? So when we say with a grain of salt, what this group of words mean is something totally different from what each of the words by themselves mean. With a grain of salt means to be um, what we call skeptical. Don't take what you hear or what is said to be the truth. That's all it means. Is that when somebody says, "Oh, take it with a grain of salt," it means what you're hearing may not actually be true. So that's what it means. But you can't get that from this, right? This doesn't make any sense if you're looking at each word. But that's what an idiom is. It's an expression that we use in English that the meaning is something different from what all of these words mean. Down the road. So you can use this and it makes sense, right? Somebody could say, "Oh, where's the University of Utah? Where's the college at?" And if you're at the hospital, you say, "Oh, it's just down the road," because that's a direction. Down the road, right? You're at the top of the hill, you go down the road, and there's the University of Utah. But somebody could say, "Oh, my retirement is down the road." Now, literally, if we're looking at just the meaning of the words, you're just like, down the road? How is your retirement down the street? That doesn't make any sense. But what we mean when we say down the road is it's in the future. It's far away in the future. It's down the road. So we use that phrase because we, refer to life in English as like a road, the road that you're on, the travel, something that we say a lot. So when we say down the road, it means we're talking about in life, later in life. If somebody says it is up to you, that's another idiom. What's up to me? Up is a direction. That doesn't make sense. When somebody says it is up to you, it just means you decide. From scratch, just means like if I said I made cookies from scratch, it doesn't mean that like I made cookies from scratching myself or from scratching something else, right? Scratch is like an action, it's a verb. But if we say, "Oh, I did this from scratch," when you use it with this preposition from and the word scratch, when you say it like that, it means that you did it from the very beginning. So if I said I made cookies from scratch, it means that I didn't buy cookie dough to just put in the oven. It doesn't mean that I bought a box where it's like pre-made cookies and you just add the eggs and the milk and stuff. From scratch is like I got the flour and the baking soda or the baking powder, and I got the chocolate chips and I mixed them all together with eggs and milk and sugar and butter, and I made cookies. So that's all it means. It's like from the very beginning. So don't worry, we will do a lesson on idioms in the future if this is super confusing or you just want to know them because you hear them all the time in English. It'll be helpful to know what people mean when they say it. So next thing we're going to talk about is sometimes with prepositions, we get confused on whether or not we use one or the other. So sometimes, since you're learning English through rules, right? Through how people use it, the more you think about what it means, the more you get confused, right? Like this little baby, like the more I think, the more I get confused. That's how prepositions are, is the more you think about them, the more confusing they get. So I wanted to talk about some prepositions that you can get confused with each other. So sometimes people don't know if they should use for or since when you're talking about time. So you want to use for with a period of time. So use for to answer the question, how long? So when you answer with a number, that's what you answer with, and that's why you use for. So I have worked here for 3 years. You don't say I have worked here since 3 years, and here's why. So you use since. I'm gonna move this out of the way. I'm just always in the way. Okay, so you use since with a date or the start of a time. So you also use it to answer the question of how long. How long have you worked here? How long have you lived in the United States? But the answer, you use since if your answer is about the beginning of the period of time, not just the length of time. So you use for, right, to say, okay, I've lived in the US for 15 years. But if you use like the beginning of the time, you'd use since. I have worked here since 2008. Or I have been working here since last summer. So we use since instead of for when we're answering the question how long, right? Because we're using the beginning of the period of time. But we use for if we're talking about just a general length of time. So for 10 years, for a month, for 2 weeks, for 2 hours. But if you said to use the word since, the preposition since, if somebody said, oh, how long have you been sitting here? I have been sitting here for 2 hours. You're giving the length of time with for. But if somebody said, oh, how long have you been sitting here? You could say, oh, I've been sitting here since 11 o'clock in the morning or 11 a.m. You use since because you didn't say the length of time, how long. You told them when it started, and that's why you use the word since. So should you use before or ago? This one is confusing sometimes. I think this is confusing for Arabic speakers the most. So when you're using before or ago to talk about past time, so things, time in the past. So you use before instead of what's the word? You use before instead of ago with the name of a specific point in time. So when I say specific, it means when it has a name, right? Or it's called something. So you would use it, you would say before June, before Monday, before COVID. So you use before to answer questions that ask, when did something happen? I did the laundry before my sister came home. So the specific time, like what's going on is my sister came home, and we use before my sister came home. I was a waitress before COVID started, right? That's why you'd use before. Ago is you want to use it with a general period of time. So you use it to answer the questions that ask, how long ago in the past did something happen? So you would say, if somebody said, oh, when did Sarah leave? You'd say, oh, she left 2 hours ago. You wouldn't say she left before 2 hours, because if you used before 2 hours, that doesn't make sense, because when you say before, it's talking about time. I'm trying to use describe it without saying the word before, but you use before to talk about like the beginning, right? Before this happened. Ago is saying, she left 2 hours ago. How long ago in the past did something happen, instead of when did something happen? So this is saying, how long ago it happened. So my brother called me 20 minutes ago. That's another way you'd use it. So sometimes it's hard to know if you use in or after when you're talking about future time. So when you talk about the future, use in with a general period of time. So you use in to answer the question, when will something happen, right? And when I say general, it means, you know how like you use for, like for 2 weeks, that's like the length of time. You use in because it's general. Do you know when you will be back from your vacation? You'd say, oh, in 2 weeks. I will be home in an hour. I will be back in 2 weeks. She is retiring in a year. It's a general time. But when you're talking about the future, you want to use after with the name of the period of time. So you want to use after to answer when specifically will something happen. So you're talking about the future. This is just when you're talking about the future, but you use after to answer, when specifically. So I will be available after 1:30. You wouldn't want to say I will be available in 1:30. That doesn't work. I will be available after 1:30. She can leave after closing up the building. So those are something specific, right? 1:30 is a number. Closing up the building is a certain action that you have to do. You know, that's why you use after for when you're talking about something in the future. Um, Instead of in, which is something more general. I'll be back in an hour instead of saying I will leave after I close up the building, right? Um, so, and we'll continue talking about this next class. I wanted to do more, but I didn't want to make the lesson too long. So that's it for today. And the next lesson, I'm going to go through and just show you some of the most common prepositions and what they all mean to kind of help you better use them.